It is. Hey, one last question for you. Why don't you fly?
You know what? I never liked it, and I had to when I was on the road full time, but now that I don't need the money or the opportunities, and after September 11th, me and airplanes don't mix. It's, going to an airport these days, it's like going to jail where they let you keep your belt. Okay, and I don't need it. I got a nice Lincoln Navigator with a DVD player and a 30-gallon ice chest, and I throw my lovely better half in the car, and we go on trips and take vacations when I make wrestling shows now. Used to, I worked 7 nights a week. Now I'm gone 7 nights to make one shot.
I got what you're saying. Hey, Jim, thanks so much for the time. It was great talking to you again.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, be well.
Our next question comes from Jason Clevitt from Slam Wrestling. Your line is open, sir.
Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Jason, how you doing, man?
Not too bad, calling up from Canada, and I got to say this is one of the more entertaining conference calls that I've listened in on, so thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. And I've been on Slam Wrestling, have I not?
I believe you have, yes.
I sure have. So what's going on in Toronto?
I'm actually in Calgary.
You're in Calgary. That's right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something else in Toronto.
No, we're based out of
Well, how are things in Calgary, Alberta, Canada?
Pretty good. It's Stampede Week, so we've got a whole bunch of people pretending to be cowboys.
Well, go down to the corral and kick a bull for me.
I will do that for you. People have been taking a lot out of my questions. My first question, I guess, would be people like you, Gabe Sapolsky, who's a booker for Ring of Honor, some of the people who are the best minds in the business never really were in an active professional wrestler or had like more of a managerial role. And with managers not existing so much today without having, as you said, big breasts, what sort of advice would you give somebody who wanted to break into the business not as a wrestler but as somebody who had a goal of potentially being a booker or having a behind-the-scenes role in influencing a wrestling promotion in that way?
Well, and also the term booker is now outdated. Now it's writer in many cases, which I refuse to use that term, just like I refuse to use the term character. If you don't have a personality, you can't manufacture one. You don't play a character. You are yourself and let the chips fall where they may. Booker arose from matchmaker, which is basically the job in wrestling. You take the personalities that you have in your company, whether it be 30 years ago, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, or right now, AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels. You take the personalities you have in your company and you make matches that you believe people will want to see between these outrageous, unique, and colorful personalities that have conflicts. You make the matches. And that's all you really need to do. Today things are many times overwritten, overanalyzed, overproduced, and the best thing you can do to get good professional wrestling that the fans like is to let guys who have personalities show them, who have ability, use it, and then make matches between people that the fans really like, and in some cases the fans really would like to see get their butt kicked, and see what happens. And that's the trick of matchmaking. And I think that Vince Russo, the demon seed of all professional wrestling, was one who hastened the new wave of things where the writers or whatever they call them, they think they're the stars. I mean, Russo even wanted credit. He couldn't get credit. He couldn't get patted on the back except by the Internet audience because he didn't get a credit at the end of the show, so he put himself on camera in WCW and put a billionaire out of business. You can't have good wrestling without two things, great talent and good matchmaking. And the best matchmaking in the world can't overcome bad talent, and the greatest talent in the world cannot overcome crummy matchmaking. But the talent, to me, is more important. Because if you don't have the product, I don't care how good your salesman is, you can't sell it. So to answer your question now, for people who want to be involved in the matchmaking and creative process, you don't have to be a wrestler, but I believe firmly you do have to be two things. You have to be a big wrestling fan because you got to know what the fans want to see, but you also have to have had some type of performing experience, whether it be as a manager or a referee or an announcer or a wrestler or whatever, because you have to know what it's like on both sides. You have to know what the fans want to see, but you also have to know what it's like to perform that, and you have to know how to give people maybe not what they want to see, but what you want them to see to make the most money. So if that makes any sense to you.
It does. And my second question is sort of the old school versus new school mentality. Lance Storm was doing some work in OVW towards the end of your tenure there, And I'm actually looking at his website right now, and he mentioned he's comparing WWE to TNA and basically saying how Raw has 18 minutes of wrestling, and in a 1-hour Impact, they had 22 minutes of wrestling, and you cut a promo, which he says is what you do best, cutting wrestling promos, and he hopes you play more than just an on-air role with the company, and that while you and him are often of different schools of thought when it comes to booking, your stuff always has direction, makes sense, and is easy to follow.
Well, let me say this about Lance, and I'll let you get back to it. Is Lance, and actually, to add to the list I mentioned a minute ago, Lance Storm and Chris Jericho worked their first matches in the United States for me and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I saw their tapes when they'd just been in the business a couple of years, and I saw the talent, and I think Lance is tremendous. And the only difference that we have is in some cases, I like a little more sizzle, but I like there to be a steak down there somewhere. Lance likes all steak, but he may not like it to sizzle too much, and then you got the WWE where you smell the thing, but it's still somewhere in the kitchen. You never see it. So that's the only difference that Lance and I have, but there's no such thing as old school and new school. There's good wrestling and bad wrestling. And if somebody can talk, let them talk. If somebody can wrestle, let them wrestle. If somebody's not a comedian, don't try to have them tell jokes. So to me, wrestling overall was better in the 80s because it was concentrated more on credible sport and wrestling. But that's not to say there's not great wrestling today, and that's not to say that everything was too slow-paced in 1960. Good wrestling and bad wrestling. It's not old school and new school. I'll take anything that the fans like, that they want to pay to see, and that's entertaining to watch.
Well, I guess my final question is sort of about something specific that's been talked about recently online. Harry Smith is the son of Davey Boy Smith, and
yes,
he's a great talent in his own right. There's talk that they're going to be bringing him into WWE as Brooke Hogan's boyfriend to be with Randy Orton.
Okay.
Davey Boy Smith's son would be enough.
Well, now see, now you're thinking too logically. You know, there needs to be a twist, because that's another thing. Everybody thinks they have to fool everybody and surprise everybody these days. Davey Boy Smith was one of the biggest stars in the business in the 80s and 90s. And to be his son and to be the size that I understand Harry is, I've not met the young man, but to understand with the size and the natural ability he has, that ought to be enough. I don't believe he's Brooke's boyfriend, because he's not Brooke's boyfriend. I've never met Brooke either. But I know they're not boyfriend and girlfriend, and I don't think anybody else is going to buy it either. It's just another example of something being, a square peg being forced into a round hole. You got the British Bulldog's son. He's a hell of an athlete. Here he is. Take a look, decide for yourself, folks. Doesn't need any bells and whistles and parsley.
Jimmy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. It's been an honor talking to you.
Thank you, and watch out for the Stampede.
I will.
Our next question comes from Adam Martin from WrestleView.com. Your line is open, sir.
How you doing, Mr. Cornette?
Adam, how are you?
Doing great. I wanted to kind of get your take on something that I've always found really interesting in the last few years. I've been covering TNA since they started, and when a lot of people kind of wrote them off, and I was just excited to see something kind of new on TV because, you know, in 2002, it probably wasn't the best time to be a wrestling fan. And when they came along, I was really excited just to see something kind of new, see some of the newer guys that were coming up. A lot of comments have been made about comparing WWE and TNA. And, you know, obviously you have a lot of experience with this, being in the WWE, even in the Beyond the Mat film, where you were even discussing this, even Vince was discussing how they like to make movies there and how they consider themselves more entertainment. A lot of people, and I know there was already one Paul Heyman reference earlier. I don't mean to shove him down your throat.
No, that's okay. I'd love to shove him somewhere, but go ahead.
Well, the thing that he said, and, you know, this is a common thing with a lot of WWE guys that I speak with, is that they don't consider TNA to be competition because they're entertainment and TNA's wrestling. And a lot of TNA guys agree with that. They say, yeah, because, you know, we aren't entertainment. Do you really think that that's the big difference between TNA and WWE, is that TNA is wrestling and just WWE is on a whole, their platform, even though that there happens to be a ring there?
Well, see, there's the problem, and there's why I didn't last any longer in Stamford on the creative end of things, is because the WWE has deluded themselves into thinking they're not wrestling. Vince McMahon created the term sports entertainment in 1984 to try to fool the big advertisers into thinking that they weren't buying into some low-rent trailer park entertainment, that they were buying into something that was entirely new and revolutionary. And if you notice, for those of us who are old enough to remember, the crowds and the per capita attendance and the ratings have steadily dropped over the past 20 years since wrestling got big. You know, Memphis, Tennessee in 1974 was drawing 8,000 people 50 times a year to the Mid-South Coliseum. Now they're lucky if they can go to the Mid-South Coliseum or the Pyramid in Memphis twice a year and draw 8,000 people. So what has happened is they've deluded themselves into believing that they're not wrestling and that they are sports entertainment. And the new people that have been hired that have heard this story in the company and don't have a wrestling background to know better, buy it and believe it. And therefore, you got a bunch of people running around up there in Stanford that when you say, well, boy, you know, the wrestling business is blah, 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 they say, oh, we're not wrestling, we're sports entertainment. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard anybody say, hey, did you see the sports entertainment show on TV last night? Did you get your tickets to the sports entertainment matches down at the Coliseum this Tuesday?
Yeah.
Boy, what a sports entertainment match that was. Boy, that guy's a great sports entertainer. I was sitting in a